Most people look at wealth the way travelers look at a distant city skyline at night. They see the lights, the towers, the movement, the evidence of life and power. But they rarely ask the deeper question, where did all of this begin? Because what you see in the world, the businesses, the fortunes, the industries, the lives that seem to rise above ordinary circumstances did not begin where you think they did. They did not begin in offices, banks, or marketplaces. They began somewhere far quieter, somewhere almost invisible, in a place that exists inside every human being. I want to speak to you about that place tonight, because once you understand it, you will begin to see wealth in an entirely different way. Before anything becomes visible in the world, it exists first in the mind, not as a vague hope, not as a passing wish, but as a clear inner pattern that slowly gathers strength until reality has no choice but to follow its direction. Every building that rises from the ground begins as an idea held by someone long before the first brick appears. Every company that grows into something powerful began as a simple thought in the mind of a person who could see what did not yet exist. Every fortune, no matter how large, passed through a moment when it existed nowhere except inside the imagination of one individual. This is the invisible workshop behind every fortune. And the remarkable thing is that this workshop is not reserved for a few extraordinary individuals. It exists in you exactly as it exists in anyone who has ever built something meaningful in this world. The difference between those who eventually create wealth and those who remain where they started is not access to the workshop itself. Everyone has access to it. The difference is that some people learn to use it deliberately, while others allow it to operate randomly, shaped by circumstance, fear, or habit. I want you to think about how quietly this process begins. No announcement is made when a powerful idea first appears in a person's mind. No audience gathers to witness the moment when someone decides they will no longer live according to the limits they once accepted. It happens privately. A realization forms. A new possibility takes shape. And from that moment forward, the individual begins to see the world differently. At first, nothing on the outside appears to change. The same streets, the same work, the same conversations continue as they always have. But something subtle has shifted inside the person who now holds a new image of what life could become. That image begins to influence the way they think, the way they speak, the choices they make when opportunities appear. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their actions begin to align with the direction of that image. You might say that the mind begins drawing a blueprint before the world begins constructing the building. The majority of people never consciously create such a blueprint. Their thoughts are scattered between worries about the past and anxieties about the future. Their attention moves from problem to problem without ever settling on a clear vision of the life they truly intend to build. When the mind operates in this reactive way, it cannot construct anything substantial. It becomes like a workshop filled with tools but without a plan. Activity happens, but creation does not. But when a person learns to hold a clear mental picture of what they intend to bring into existence, the workshop begins to operate differently. Thoughts stop wandering aimlessly. Decisions become more intentional. Energy that once scattered in many directions begins to move toward a single objective. And something fascinating begins to happen in the process. The individual starts noticing opportunities that once passed unnoticed. This is not because the world suddenly changed overnight. It is because their perception changed. When you hold a strong image of where you are going, your mind naturally begins searching for paths that lead there. Conversations that once seemed ordinary begin to contain useful ideas. Situations that once appeared discouraging reveal unexpected possibilities. Even setbacks begin to look different. Not like permanent obstacles, but like adjustments in direction. You see, the invisible workshop does more than produce ideas. It reorganizes attention, and attention is one of the most powerful forces shaping your experience of life. Whatever your mind repeatedly focuses on begins to influence your emotions, your decisions, and ultimately your results. A person who constantly thinks about limitations eventually behaves in ways that reinforce those limitations. A person who holds a clear vision of expansion begins behaving differently, often without even realizing it at first. Their posture changes, their conversations change, their willingness to take initiative increases. They start asking different questions. They become curious instead of cautious. They begin moving toward opportunities instead of waiting for circumstances to improve. This is how fortunes quietly begin to take shape, not through dramatic moments of luck, but through a steady alignment between what a person imagines and what they consistently do. The mind supplies the direction, and action gradually builds the structure. Over time, what once existed only as an inner picture begins appearing in the outer world as real conditions. And when people later look at the finished result, a successful company, a thriving career, a life of financial freedom, it often appears as though the outcome arrived suddenly. They see the visible result, but miss the long, invisible process that preceded it. They do not see the countless moments when the individual returned to the same vision, strengthened the same belief, and continued acting according to an image others could not yet see. Every fortune has such a history, a quiet period when the world remained unchanged while the mind of one person refused to accept that it must remain that way forever. That refusal becomes the beginning of creation. It marks the moment when a person stops reacting to circumstances and starts shaping them. The invisible workshop begins working the moment you decide to direct it consciously. Once you realize that the mind operates this way, a new sense of responsibility appears. Thoughts no longer seem trivial or temporary. They become tools. Images become instructions. Attention becomes the guiding force that determines where energy flows and what eventually grows. The workshop has always been operating, whether you noticed it or not. The only question that remains is whether the thoughts moving through it are building something by design or simply repeating the patterns that already exist. And once that question becomes clear in your mind, the way you look at your own thinking can never quite return to what it was before. There is a belief that quietly shapes the lives of millions of people, and yet very few ever stop to question it. It is the belief that wealth belongs to a fortunate minority, that prosperity is something granted to a few, while the majority must simply learn to live with less. You may not say this belief out loud, but if you listen carefully to the conversations around you in workplaces, in families, in passing remarks about success, you will notice how deeply this idea has settled into the collective mind. People speak about wealth as though it were an exception rather than a possibility. They treat abundance as though it must be justified, as though wanting more from life somehow requires an apology. I want you to consider the possibility that this belief is not only mistaken, but fundamentally backwards. Wealth, when understood properly, is not a rare privilege reserved for a select group. It is a natural extension of life itself. The same force that pushes a seed upward through the soil, the same force that causes rivers to carve new paths through stone, the same force that compels living things to grow, expand, and evolve. That same force operates within you. Life, by its very nature, seeks expression. It seeks expansion. It seeks to move beyond its present form into something larger and more complete. When you feel the desire for a richer life, more freedom, more opportunity, more resources, more influence, that desire is not a flaw in your character. It is not evidence of greed. It is the movement of life itself attempting to express itself more fully through you. For generations, however, people have been taught to distrust that impulse. They have been told that ambition must be restrained, that wanting prosperity reflects selfishness, that one should be content with limitation. These ideas may sound noble on the surface, but they ignore a simple truth about human nature. A person cannot fully develop their abilities while constantly struggling to meet basic needs. A mind preoccupied with survival cannot easily explore creativity, innovation, or contribution. When every decision revolves around scarcity, the horizon of possibility narrows. Wealth, in its true sense, is not simply money. It is the condition that allows human potential to unfold without unnecessary constraint. Think about what it means to live fully as a human being. You are not merely a body seeking comfort, nor merely a mind collecting knowledge, nor merely a spirit searching for meaning. You are all of these at once. The development of each aspect of your nature requires certain conditions: time, resources, freedom, stability. Without those conditions, growth becomes difficult and sometimes impossible. Wealth provides those conditions. It creates the environment in which ideas can flourish, talents can be refined, and contributions can reach beyond the limits of immediate survival. This is why the desire for prosperity is not shallow when viewed from a broader perspective. What you truly seek when you pursue wealth is not simply currency or possessions. You are seeking the ability to live with greater scope. You are seeking the ability to think without constant pressure, to create without unnecessary barriers, to offer something meaningful to the world around you. Money becomes the instrument through which these possibilities are organized. You may have heard people say that focusing on material success distracts from spiritual or intellectual development, as though these dimensions of life must exist in conflict with one another. But human life is not divided into isolated compartments. The mind, the body, and the spirit form a single, integrated experience. To deny one aspect of that experience in the name of another creates imbalance. Material resources, when used wisely, support the development of every other aspect of life. Imagine a person with extraordinary ideas who never has the opportunity to explore them because they are constantly struggling to maintain stability. Imagine a creative individual who must abandon their gifts simply to survive. Imagine the inventions that were never built, the businesses never started, the solutions never discovered because someone believed they had no right to pursue abundance. Limitation does not elevate humanity. It silences potential. You have the right to be rich because you have the right to grow. Growth is not merely a biological process. It is an existential one. Every human being carries within them the capacity to become more capable, more aware, more effective. But growth requires room. It requires opportunity. It requires the ability to experiment, to build, to fail, to learn, and to try again without the constant shadow of scarcity shaping every decision. Another misconception that keeps many people from accepting this right is the idea that wealth is limited. People imagine the world as a fixed container of resources, where one person's gain must inevitably come at the expense of another. If this were true, the pursuit of prosperity would indeed become a harsh competition in which success for one would diminish opportunity for others. But the history of human progress tells a different story. New wealth is created constantly. Entire industries appear where none existed before. Technologies reshape economies. Ideas transform the way people live, work, and interact. A century ago, many of the opportunities that exist today had not even been imagined. Wealth is not a static pile of resources waiting to be divided. It is a field of expanding possibility, shaped by creativity, innovation, and human cooperation. This understanding changes the entire meaning of success. Instead of fighting for a limited share of what already exists, individuals who think creatively begin asking a different question. What can I bring into the world that increases its value? When you create something useful, an idea, a service, a solution, a product, you add to the total wealth of human experience. You do not take from others. You expand the field itself. The moment you recognize that life is built upon expansion rather than limitation, something subtle shifts inside you. The quiet resignation that often accompanies scarcity begins to dissolve. You start to notice possibilities that once seemed invisible. Doors that once looked closed begin to reveal hinges. Claiming your right to be rich does not mean demanding wealth from the world. It means accepting your role as a participant in the ongoing process of creation. It means acknowledging that the same force driving growth throughout nature is also operating through your ambitions, your ideas, and your efforts. When that realization settles into your thinking, ambition begins to feel different. It is no longer fueled by comparison or envy. It becomes an expression of alignment with the natural movement of life itself. The desire to build, to improve, to expand, to contribute. These impulses become signals that you are participating in something larger than personal gain. You are participating in growth, and growth, when allowed to unfold without unnecessary doubt or hesitation, has a remarkable way of carrying a person far beyond the limits they once believed were fixed. Walk through any city long enough, and you will eventually notice something curious. In some streets, energy seems to move freely. Ideas are exchanged quickly. People plan projects. Opportunities circulate almost invisibly between conversations, yet only a few blocks away. The atmosphere feels entirely different. The same human intelligence exists, the same creativity, the same dreams, but they remain quiet, almost dormant, as though something essential has been placed under pressure. What you are witnessing in those moments is not a difference in talent or character. You are witnessing the silent weight of limitation. Poverty does not simply reduce comfort. It reduces the space in which human potential can breathe. I want you to think carefully about the way the human mind actually works. Your mind, like every other mind, requires attention, stability, and energy in order to explore possibilities. It needs moments of quiet in which imagination can expand and new ideas can form. But when life becomes a constant negotiation with scarcity, something very different happens inside the mind. Attention narrows. Time feels compressed. Decisions become urgent instead of thoughtful. Instead of asking what you could build, the mind begins asking what must be solved immediately. In such a condition, the future rarely feels like a field of opportunity. It feels like something distant and uncertain. A person may still carry dreams, of course, because the human spirit has a remarkable ability to imagine better circumstances even under difficult conditions. But those dreams often remain suspended somewhere between hope and exhaustion, because the environment surrounding them does not provide the stability necessary for growth. This is why poverty restricts potential in ways that are not always visible from the outside. When people observe someone struggling financially, they sometimes assume the problem lies in ability or effort. Yet what they fail to recognize is how deeply environment shapes behavior. A person who lives under constant pressure to survive must allocate a tremendous portion of their mental energy simply to maintain stability. That energy cannot simultaneously be used to explore innovation, creativity, or long-term strategy. The mind becomes occupied with immediate problems, and the horizon of possibility quietly contracts. You can see this pattern repeated throughout history. Many of the individuals who eventually changed industries, advanced science, or built influential enterprises did not do so while trapped in constant survival pressure. They required space to think, to experiment, to test ideas without the fear that one mistake would collapse their entire stability. Wealth provides that space, not because wealth itself is magical, but because it removes the relentless friction of scarcity. Consider something simple: learning. A person who is constantly working merely to sustain daily life has little time left to develop new skills or explore unfamiliar ideas. Growth becomes postponed again and again, not because of laziness, but because exhaustion slowly replaces curiosity. Over time, this postponement compounds. Opportunities that require preparation remain out of reach, and the gap between potential and reality quietly widens. Now imagine the opposite condition. Imagine a mind that is not constantly negotiating with survival. That mind begins to behave differently almost immediately. It observes more carefully. It plans further ahead. It experiments more freely because the cost of failure no longer threatens basic stability. Under those conditions, creativity becomes natural. Ideas begin connecting with one another. Solutions appear where obstacles once dominated attention. This is why wealth, properly understood, is not merely about comfort. It is about capacity to think clearly, capacity to plan beyond tomorrow, capacity to invest time and energy into ideas that may take years to develop. When those capacities expand, human potential begins to unfold in ways that were previously impossible. Talents that once remained hidden find expression. Intelligence that once operated defensively begins operating creatively. You might notice something else as well. Poverty often produces a psychological habit that reinforces its own conditions. When resources feel scarce for long enough, the mind becomes trained to expect limitation. It begins interpreting every situation through the lens of risk. Even when opportunities appear, they may look dangerous rather than promising. Caution replaces initiative. Preservation replaces expansion. This is not a flaw in character. It is a predictable response to prolonged uncertainty. The mind protects itself by becoming conservative, by reducing exposure to potential loss. Yet, that same protective instinct can quietly block the very actions required to move toward greater opportunity. Breaking this pattern requires more than effort. It requires a shift in the way a person relates to possibility itself. When the mind begins to understand that wealth is not a rare privilege but a natural extension of growth, something subtle changes. Scarcity stops feeling like a permanent identity. It becomes a condition that can be altered. The moment that understanding takes root, attention begins to reorganize itself. Instead of asking only how to endure the present, the mind begins asking how to expand beyond it. Curiosity slowly replaces resignation. The imagination, which may have been dormant under the weight of constant pressure, starts to awaken again. A person begins noticing ways to create value, to develop skills, to participate more fully in the flow of opportunity around them. This shift does not happen dramatically. It often begins quietly, with a simple realization that life was never meant to remain confined within narrow conditions forever. The human being was designed to grow. Every instinct toward improvement, every desire to build something larger than the present moment, reflects that deeper design. When that truth becomes clear to you, poverty begins to lose its authority over your thinking. It may still exist as a temporary circumstance, but it no longer defines the boundaries of your potential. Your attention moves outward again. The future stops feeling distant. Possibility returns to the field of vision, and once the mind begins to see possibilities again, the direction of a life can begin to change in ways that are difficult to predict from the outside. From a distance, wealth often looks unpredictable. You see one person rise rapidly while another struggles for years, and the difference can appear mysterious, almost accidental. People then explain these outcomes in the simplest ways they can find. They speak about luck, timing, connections, or circumstances. And once these explanations take root, they begin to shape how individuals view their own potential. If wealth depends mainly on chance, then effort becomes uncertain. If success belongs mostly to those who were born with advantages, then ambition quietly loses its direction. But when you study the patterns behind enduring success, something very different begins to emerge. The individuals who repeatedly build wealth, who create opportunity again and again even after failure, rarely behave randomly. Their thinking follows a structure. Their actions follow a pattern. Their decisions reflect a consistent relationship with possibility and growth. When these patterns are examined carefully, they reveal something powerful. Wealth follows laws. I want you to consider that statement carefully. Not tendencies, not vague suggestions, but laws, principles that operate with reliability when they are understood and applied. Just as the physical world obeys laws of gravity, motion, and energy, the process of creating wealth follows certain mental and behavioral principles that produce consistent outcomes over time. When those principles are ignored, progress becomes unstable. When they are respected, results begin to accumulate. This is what is meant by the science of wealth creation. A science does not rely on hope. It relies on cause and effect. If you combine certain elements in the correct way, the result becomes predictable. The same idea applies to the creation of prosperity. Wealth does not appear because someone simply wishes for it. It appears when thinking, behavior, and purpose align with the natural movement of growth. One of the first misunderstandings that must disappear before this science becomes clear is the belief that wealth is limited. Many people imagine the economy as a fixed structure in which resources must be fought over. In such a view, if someone becomes successful, it must mean that another person lost something in the process. This assumption quietly produces fear. It encourages competition built on anxiety rather than creation built on contribution. But history offers a different picture. New industries emerge constantly. Entire markets appear where none existed before. Technologies reshape the way people live, communicate, travel, and work. Each of these transformations generates new forms of wealth that did not previously exist. Accenturi ego. The opportunities surrounding digital communication, global commerce, and modern transportation were unimaginable. Today, they form the foundation of entire economies. This continuous expansion reveals something essential about the nature of wealth. It is not a pile of resources waiting to be divided. It is a living process driven by imagination, productivity, and cooperation. When individuals participate creatively in this process, they add value to the world rather than simply competing for what already exists. And here is where the science becomes practical. Everything that eventually becomes wealth begins as a thought. A thought becomes an idea becomes a plan becomes action, and action, when repeated consistently in the right direction, produces results. The outer structure of prosperity grows from this inner sequence. Change the sequence, and the results begin to change as well. This is why the mind becomes the starting point of wealth creation. Your thoughts influence what you notice. What you notice influences the choices you make. Those choices gradually shape your habits. Over time, habits define the trajectory of your life. A person who repeatedly thinks about limitation behaves differently from someone who consistently thinks about expansion. One hesitates where the other experiments. One waits for certainty while the other moves forward with calculated confidence. These differences may seem small in the moment, but their long-term effects become enormous. Imagine two individuals starting from similar circumstances. One believes opportunities are rare and fragile. The other believes opportunities can be created. The first person watches the environment cautiously, waiting for favorable conditions. The second person actively searches for ways to improve what already exists. Over months and years, their decisions begin to diverge. The first individual becomes increasingly careful, sometimes even skeptical of new possibilities. The second becomes increasingly inventive, experimenting with ideas that gradually open new paths. Eventually, observers may look at the second individual and call the result luck. Yet what appears sudden is often the visible surface of a long, invisible process. This is where another principle of the science of wealth creation becomes important. Thought alone is not enough. Thought must direct action, but not just any action. Action performed in a deliberate, efficient manner. Many people work tirelessly and remain stuck in the same position because their actions lack clear direction. They react to circumstances instead of shaping them. The science of wealth insists on a different approach. Each action should move life slightly closer to the vision held in the mind. Even small actions become powerful when they accumulate consistently in the same direction. Progress does not always appear dramatic at first. In fact, much of the early movement toward prosperity occurs quietly, beneath the surface of visible results. You might compare it to planting seeds in soil. After the seeds are placed in the ground, the surface appears unchanged for some time. Yet beneath the soil, roots are forming. Systems of growth are establishing themselves. When the first signs of life finally break through the surface, observers often perceive it as sudden. But the true work began long before anything visible appeared. Wealth creation follows a similar rhythm. A person who thinks clearly about their goals, who directs their attention towards solutions rather than obstacles, and who acts deliberately, each day begins aligning themselves with the expanding nature of life. Ideas begin connecting. Resources appear through relationships and collaboration. Opportunities emerge in places that once seemed ordinary. This is not magic. It is alignment. When thought, intention, and action operate in harmony with growth, life begins responding accordingly. The environment reorganizes itself around the direction established by the individual's focus. New possibilities become visible because the mind has trained itself to recognize them. The science of wealth creation therefore asks something very specific from you. It asks you to take responsibility for the direction of your thinking, to observe the patterns of your attention, to act consistently in ways that move your life toward expansion rather than contraction. The moment you understand that wealth follows principles rather than accidents, something shifts inside your perception. Success stops looking mysterious. It begins to look structured. Instead of wondering whether prosperity will arrive, you begin asking how closely your thinking and actions align with the principles that produce it. That question alone has the power to reorganize the way a person approaches work, opportunity, and possibility. And when that reorganization becomes consistent, the results that once seemed unpredictable begin to follow a very recognizable pattern. Stand quietly in any place where human activity has shaped the landscape: a busy city center, a factory floor, a university campus, even a quiet neighborhood street, and you are looking at the visible consequences of thought. Every structure, every system, every enterprise you see around you existed first in the mind of someone who imagined a different arrangement of the world. What appears solid and permanent today was once nothing more than a mental picture that refused to disappear. I want you to notice the power hidden in that simple fact, because once you understand it, the relationship between your thinking and your environment begins to look very different. Most people assume that circumstances determine how they think. If conditions improve, they feel optimistic. If difficulties appear, their thinking becomes cautious or discouraged. In this way, the mind becomes a mirror reflecting the environment rather than a force shaping it. But the individuals who consistently alter their circumstances tend to operate in the opposite direction. Their thinking leads first, and their environment gradually reorganizes itself around the direction established by that thinking. This may sound abstract until you examine how decisions actually occur. Before you take any action, no matter how small, the mind creates a moment of interpretation. You evaluate what is possible, what is worthwhile, what might succeed or fail. That interpretation is shaped by the patterns of thought you have practiced over time. A person who repeatedly expects limitation approaches the world differently from someone who repeatedly imagines expansion. Their posture, tone, choices, and willingness to act diverge in subtle ways that accumulate with remarkable force over the years. Imagine two individuals facing the same situation, an uncertain opportunity that requires initiative. One mind immediately begins listing the risks. What if it fails? What if others disagree? What if the effort produces no result? These questions narrow attention and delay action. The other mind approaches the same moment differently. What could this become? What can be improved? What would happen if I tried? The environment has not changed, but the response has, and that response gradually influences what the environment becomes. Thought operates like an architect preparing a blueprint before construction begins. Without the blueprint, building becomes chaotic. Materials accumulate without structure. Effort is wasted because there is no guiding design. In the same way, a mind without clear direction drifts through circumstances reacting to whatever appears next. Energy is expended constantly, yet progress feels uncertain because the inner design remains unclear. When a person holds a clear mental structure for their life, something begins to shift. Decisions align more easily because they are measured against a vision. Opportunities become easier to recognize because the mind knows what it is searching for. Even setbacks become easier to interpret because they are seen as adjustments within a larger plan rather than permanent defeats. In this way, thought quietly begins shaping the direction of experience. You may wonder whether thoughts alone can truly influence the external world. The answer becomes clearer when you follow the chain connecting thought to action. Thoughts guide attention. Attention influence émotion. Emotion fuels behavior. Behavior produces results. The environment we experience is therefore not separate from our thinking, but deeply intertwined with it. Change the dominant pattern of thought, and the sequence that follows begins to change as well. Consider how innovation often emerges. A person holds a mental image of something that does not yet exist, a solution to a problem, a product that improves daily life, a service that organizes chaos more efficiently. At first, the idea appears fragile. It exists only in imagination. Yet if the individual continues returning to that idea, refining it, testing it, and acting according to it, the environment slowly begins to respond. Conversations reveal new information. Collaborators appear. Tools and resources become available. What once existed only as thought gradually acquires physical form. From the outside, observers often attribute these developments to fortunate timing. They see the finished result and assume it arrived unexpectedly. What they cannot easily observe is the quiet persistence of thought that preceded every step. The architect held the image of the building long before construction began. The entrepreneur imagined the company long before the first customer appeared. The researcher visualized the solution long before the experiment succeeded. In each case, the mind served as the architect of reality. This does not mean that thinking alone replaces effort or discipline. Thought does not magically rearrange the world without participation, but it determines the direction in which effort moves. When thinking lacks structure, action becomes scattered. When thinking is focused, action becomes efficient. Over time, this difference in direction produces entirely different environments. Another element of this process deserves attention. Thoughts influence not only personal decisions but also the way others perceive and respond to you. When your thinking reflects clarity and confidence, your communication changes, your posture changes, the way you approach collaboration changes. People tend to respond to these signals, often without consciously analyzing them. A mind that believes in possibility creates an atmosphere that invites cooperation. A mind dominated by doubt often produces hesitation that others instinctively mirror. This is why thought can shape environments beyond the boundaries of a single individual. It radiates through behavior, language, and emotional tone, Gradually, it affects the networks of relationships surrounding a person. Opportunities are rarely created in isolation. They develop through interactions between people who share direction and energy. When your thinking aligns with growth, you begin participating more actively in those interactions. Yet the influence of thought extends even deeper. It determines what you notice and what you overlook. In any complex environment, countless possibilities exist simultaneously. Some lead toward progress, others toward stagnation. Your mental orientation functions like a filter. A mind focused on scarcity notices obstacles first. A mind trained to seek solutions notices possibilities that coexist with those obstacles. Neither mind is hallucinating. Both are observing real elements of the environment. The difference lies in what each chooses to emphasize. Over time, that emphasis directs behavior, and behavior gradually alters the surrounding conditions. In this sense, thought operates less like a wish and more like a compass. It does not instantly transport you to a destination, but it determines which direction you travel. A compass consistently pointing north will eventually guide a traveler far from where they began. In the same way, a mind consistently oriented toward growth slowly guides life into new territory. You may not always see the results immediately. Many of the most important shifts begin beneath the surface, just as foundations are poured before the structure of a building becomes visible. But the direction has already been established long before observers notice the change. And once the mind begins operating as an architect rather than a mirror, the relationship between thought and reality becomes difficult to ignore. Look carefully at the way most people are taught to think about wealth, and you will notice a quiet assumption running beneath the surface. From childhood onward, the world often presents success as a race. You must run faster than someone else. You must secure a position before another person takes it. Opportunities appear limited, and the only way to move forward seems to be by outrunning, outperforming, or outmaneuvering those around you. In this picture of reality, life becomes a constant comparison. Every advancement for one person appears to reduce the chances available to another. But pause for a moment and examine whether this idea truly explains the wealth that shapes the modern world. When a new technology appears that improves communication across continents, does it take wealth away from others? Or does it create entirely new forms of value? When an invention makes transportation faster or energy more efficient, does the world become poorer for someone else? Or does the total field of opportunity expand? The answer is clear once you observe it closely. The most enduring fortunes rarely come from defeating others. They come from creating something that did not previously exist. This distinction between competition and creation may appear subtle at first, yet it changes the entire philosophy of prosperity. Competition focuses attention on what already exists. It asks how resources might be redistributed or controlled. Creation, on the other hand, focuses attention on what can be added to the world. It asks what problems remain unsolved, what systems could work better, what ideas might improve the lives of others. When individuals orient their thinking toward creation rather than competition, the entire landscape of opportunity begins to expand. I want you to consider how naturally the human mind operates when it is allowed to create. Curiosity emerges almost automatically. You notice inefficiencies in the environment. You imagine ways to improve them. You experiment with different approaches. In this state of mind, progress becomes less about defeating others and more about building something useful. Wealth then appears not as a reward taken from society, but as a reflection of the value you have contributed to it. This is the true source of enduring riches. History repeatedly confirms this principle. The individuals who reshape industries rarely succeed because they outcompete others in the traditional sense. They succeed because they introduce ideas that reorganize the entire field. Instead of fighting for a share of an existing system, they transform the system itself. Once that transformation occurs, wealth flows naturally toward the creators because they have expanded what is possible for everyone involved. You may notice that this perspective changes how you interpret opportunity. When your thinking is dominated by competition, your attention constantly measures what others possess. Their achievements appear as obstacles because they occupy positions you might desire. This mindset produces tension, comparison, and often quiet resentment. Energy that could have been used to develop new ideas becomes absorbed in monitoring the progress of others. Creation operates differently when your attention turns toward improvement rather than comparison. The actions of others become sources of information rather than threats. You observe how things are done. You ask whether something could be refined, simplified, or expanded. Instead of competing for limited space, you begin opening entirely new spaces that did not previously exist. This shift may sound philosophical, but its practical consequences are enormous. Think about how innovation actually unfolds. A creator notices something ordinary that others have accepted without question. Perhaps a process is slow, inconvenient, or unnecessarily complicated. Instead of simply competing within that system, the creator begins asking how the system itself could change. Gradually, a new idea forms an approach that eliminates friction or adds value in a way others had not considered. When that idea is implemented successfully, people adopt it because it improves their lives. Wealth follows naturally as a consequence of the improvement. In this way, prosperity becomes linked with usefulness. The more effectively a person contributes to solving problems or increasing efficiency, the more their work becomes integrated into the lives of others. This integration creates economic value, which eventually appears as financial wealth. The process is not mysterious once you recognize its structure. Creation produces value. Value attracts participation. Participation generates prosperity. Now, consider what happens when a person fully adopts this orientation toward creation. Their attention begins scanning the world differently. Instead of asking how they might win against someone else, they ask how something might be made better. Their thinking becomes inventive rather than defensive. Even ordinary situations begin revealing opportunities because improvement is always possible somewhere. This mindset also changes how you relate to collaboration. In a purely competitive environment, cooperation often feels risky. People guard information, fearing that others might gain advantage. In a creative environment, collaboration becomes natural because the goal is expansion rather than control. Different talents combine, ideas multiply, and the results often exceed what any individual could have produced alone. Creation, therefore, does something remarkable. It multiplies potential. You may start to see why individuals who consistently think in this way rarely remain trapped by scarcity for long. They are not waiting for resources to appear before acting. They are generating value through imagination and initiative. As their ideas take shape, the world begins responding. Partnerships form, resources become available, and opportunities appear that were invisible before the creative process began. Notice also how this approach affects your internal state. Competition often produces anxiety because outcomes depend on outperforming others. Creation produces engagement because outcomes depend on expressing your own capacity to improve the world. One mindset contracts the mind into defensive calculation. The other expands it into exploration and discovery. This is why many of the most influential individuals throughout history describe their work not as a battle for dominance, but as a process of building something meaningful. They focus less on defeating competitors and more on realizing ideas that contribute genuine value. Wealth then arrives as a natural extension of usefulness rather than a trophy of victory. Once you begin viewing prosperity through this lens, the environment around you starts to look different. Problems appear less intimidating because each one represents a potential opportunity for improvement. The presence of successful individuals no longer feels discouraging because their achievements demonstrate what creation can accomplish. Instead of narrowing your focus, the world begins inviting your participation. And gradually you realize that the richest opportunities rarely belong to those who fight hardest for limited space. They belong to those who expand the space itself. If you spend enough time observing people who achieve extraordinary results in life, a certain pattern begins to appear. At first, the difference is subtle, almost invisible. Two individuals may start from similar circumstances, possess comparable intelligence, and even share similar ambitions. Yet over time, their paths diverge dramatically. One person gradually expands their influence. Opportunities seem to multiply around them, and the environment begins responding to their presence in unexpected ways. The other remains caught in constant struggle, expending enormous effort but rarely moving beyond familiar limitations. What separates these two directions is not simply effort or talent. It is the orientation of the mind. I want you to notice the difference between a creative mind and a competitive mind, because understanding this distinction quietly transforms the way you approach opportunity. A competitive mind begins with comparison. Its attention naturally moves toward what others are doing, what positions they occupy, what advantages they seem to possess. Success becomes something that must be won within a narrow field. If someone else advances, it appears as though the available space for you has diminished. In this mental environment, progress feels like a contest in which every step forward requires someone else to step aside. You can feel the tension that such thinking produces. The mind becomes alert, sometimes even suspicious. Energy flows toward monitoring the actions of others rather than expanding personal capability. Even small achievements by others may trigger discouragement because they reinforce the belief that opportunity is limited. This way of thinking is extremely common, and it explains why so many individuals feel trapped within invisible boundaries. When attention becomes fixed on competition, imagination begins to shrink. Instead of asking what could be created, the mind asks only how existing positions might be captured or defended. A creative mind operates in a completely different direction. Rather than measuring itself against others, it focuses on possibility. The question that guides it is not, how do I defeat someone else, but what can be built that did not exist before? This question immediately opens an entirely new landscape of thought. The mind begins exploring improvements, innovations, and contributions that expand the environment rather than simply redistributing what is already there. Once this orientation takes hold, comparison loses its power. The success of others becomes informative rather than threatening. Their achievements demonstrate what can be accomplished rather than what has been taken away. Instead of narrowing the field of opportunity, each success story reveals new directions in which creative energy might move. I want you to notice something important about this shift. When the mind stops measuring itself through competition, its attention becomes available for invention. Curiosity awakens. You begin observing the world more carefully, noticing inefficiencies, unmet needs, and unexplored possibilities. The environment transforms from a battlefield into a workshop. In a workshop, the goal is not to defeat others. The goal is to build. This distinction explains why individuals with creative minds often appear remarkably calm, even in highly competitive industries. They are not primarily focused on what others are doing. Their attention is absorbed in refining ideas, improving systems, and discovering better ways to serve the needs of the world around them. Because their energy flows toward construction rather than comparison, their capacity to produce value increases steadily. The competitive mind, by contrast, often experiences exhaustion, monitoring rivals, defending territory, and reacting to external pressures consume enormous amounts of attention. Even when victories occur, they tend to be temporary because the environment remains defined by constant opposition. Creation generates a different kind of momentum. When an individual introduces something genuinely useful into the world, people respond naturally. They adopt the improvement because it simplifies their lives, increases efficiency, or solves a problem they previously endured. In this situation, wealth does not arise from defeating competitors. It arises from the value created through innovation. Think about how many of the products, technologies, and services you encounter daily emerged in this way. They did not appear because someone wanted to defeat another person. They appeared because someone imagined a better arrangement of existing conditions. Once that arrangement proved valuable, participation followed, and prosperity emerged as a natural consequence. This is the environment in which the creative mind thrives. You may begin to notice that creativity also influences how a person experiences challenges. A competitive mind interprets obstacles as threats. If something blocks progress, it feels like evidence that advancement is impossible. A creative mind treats obstacles as design problems. The question becomes, how can this be solved? Instead of stopping movement, the challenge stimulates further exploration. Over time, this difference in interpretation compounds dramatically. The competitive thinker often retreats when difficulties appear because each obstacle reinforces the sense of limitation. The creative thinker moves closer to the problem because each difficulty represents an opportunity to refine an idea or discover a new method. Another fascinating aspect of the creative mind is its relationship with collaboration. In a competitive environment, cooperation often feels risky. Information becomes guarded, partnerships fragile, and trust difficult to sustain. In a creative environment, Collaboration expands possibilities. Different perspectives combine, producing ideas that none of the individuals involved could have generated alone. You might say that creativity multiplies intelligence by connecting minds together. When individuals share a common orientation toward improvement rather than domination, cooperation becomes natural. The resulting energy accelerates progress because each participant contributes a unique perspective. Wealth produced through such cooperation often grows faster and more sustainably than wealth pursued through constant rivalry. Yet perhaps the most important difference between these two mental orientations lies in how they shape identity. A competitive mind defines itself by position. It asks, "Where do I stand compared to others?" Its sense of worth rises and falls depending on relative status. A creative mind defines itself by expression. It asks, "What am I capable of bringing into existence?" Its sense of worth emerges from participation in the ongoing expansion of life. When you begin identifying with creation rather than comparison, something inside you relaxes. The pressure to constantly measure yourself against others fades. Energy that once flowed toward rivalry becomes available for imagination, learning, and experimentation. Gradually, the environment around you begins to respond differently because you are participating in it differently. The world becomes less about winning and more about building. And once the mind fully adopts this creative orientation, the field of opportunity becomes far wider than competition alone could ever reveal. Look around you for a moment and consider the objects that quietly fill your daily life. The buildings you pass, the devices you use, the systems that organize modern society. None of these began as physical realities. Before concrete was poured, before machines were assembled, before organizations were formed, every one of these structures existed first as an image held in the mind of someone who could see what was not yet visible. This simple truth reveals something powerful about the nature of achievement. The external world does not appear suddenly out of chaos. It follows designs that are created long before the results become visible. When you understand this, the role of imagination begins to look very different. Most people treat imagination as something soft or optional, a pleasant escape from practical concerns. But the individuals who consistently shape the world recognize imagination as the first stage of construction. The mind becomes the place where reality is drafted before it is built. Every meaningful accomplishment begins as a mental picture strong enough to organize effort, attention, and persistence. I want you to think about how the mind actually moves when it holds such an image. When a person carries a clear picture of a desired outcome, their perception begins changing almost immediately. Situations that once seemed unrelated suddenly appear relevant. Conversations reveal useful information. Opportunities that might have been ignored earlier begin attracting attention. The mental image functions like a compass, quietly guiding the mind toward resources and possibilities that align with the vision it holds. Without this image, life often feels uncertain. Effort may still exist, but it lacks direction. A person moves from task to task, reacting to circumstances rather than shaping them. Energy is expended constantly, yet progress appears unpredictable because there is no guiding design behind the activity. It resembles construction without a blueprint. Materials accumulate. Workers remain busy, but the final structure remains unclear. The moment a blueprint appears, everything changes. A builder who holds a precise plan no longer wonders where to place each element. Every action becomes connected to the design. The foundation must support the structure. The walls must follow the layout. Each stage of work moves the project closer to completion. In the same way, a clear mental image organizes the actions of a life. Decisions begin aligning with the vision held in the mind. This alignment explains why people with strong mental images often appear remarkably focused. Their attention naturally returns to the outcome they have already imagined. When distractions appear, they evaluate them against the blueprint they carry. If an opportunity moves them closer to that vision, they pursue it. If it leads elsewhere, they let it pass. The mental image becomes a quiet standard guiding daily choices. You may notice that this process also strengthens persistence. When a person holds only a vague desire, difficulties quickly weaken motivation. But when the desired outcome has already been imagined, clearly when the mind can see and feel what it is, moving toward the individual gains a powerful reason to continue. Obstacles become temporary complications rather than final verdicts. The blueprint remains intact, even while adjustments are made during construction. Think about how architects approach complex structures. They do not expect the building process to unfold without difficulty. Materials behave unpredictably. Weather interferes with schedules, and unexpected challenges appear during construction. Yet the design remains stable. Adjustments are made. Solutions are discovered. And the work continues because the final image already exists in precise detail. Achievement follows a similar rhythm. A mental image does not guarantee that every step will be easy, but it ensures that effort remains organized around a meaningful direction. Without that direction, persistence becomes fragile. With it, persistence becomes natural because the mind continues returning to the picture it holds. Another interesting effect emerges when you begin working with mental images deliberately. Your emotional state begins aligning with the future you imagine. Instead of waiting for results to create confidence, the image itself produces a sense of movement. The mind begins behaving as though the outcome is already possible, which influences the way you speak, act, and interact with others. People often notice this change without fully understanding it. They may describe someone as confident or visionary. Yet, what they are witnessing is the influence of a strong mental blueprint guiding behavior. The individual is not guessing about the future. They are responding to an image they have already accepted internally. This inner acceptance gradually influences the external environment. When your actions consistently reflect a clear vision, others begin responding to that direction. Partnerships form, support appears, and resources gather around the project because the vision itself organizes activity. What began as a mental picture slowly gains physical structure. You might think of it as a bridge between imagination and reality. The image exists first within the mind, but the moment you begin acting according to it, the world starts participating in its construction. Conversations change because you speak about the vision. Opportunities appear because your attention recognizes them. Progress emerges because each step now belongs to a coherent design. Of course, the quality of the mental image matters greatly. A weak or contradictory picture produces uncertain movement. The mind must continually return to the image, refining it until it becomes vivid and stable. When that clarity appears, behavior begins aligning naturally with the outcome being imagined. This is why individuals who consistently achieve meaningful results rarely drift through life without direction. They carry clear pictures of what they intend to build. Those pictures guide their attention, shape their decisions, and sustain their persistence even when circumstances appear uncertain. Gradually, the invisible design held in the mind begins expressing itself through visible action. What once existed only as imagination becomes structure, influence, and achievement in the outer world. And long before observers notice the results, the blueprint has already been living quietly in the mind that first imagined it. Every meaningful transformation in a human life begins in a place that cannot be photographed, measured, or touched. Before circumstances shift, before opportunities appear, something first changes inside the mind and spirit of the individual. A quiet certainty begins to take shape, often long before any visible evidence supports it. This certainty does not arrive loudly. It emerges as a deep internal alignment, a sense that a certain direction in life is not only possible, but natural. That inner alignment is what we call faith. Now, I want you to understand something important about faith, because many people misunderstand it. Faith is not blind optimism. It is not pretending that difficulties do not exist. Faith is a disciplined relationship with possibility. It is the decision to hold your attention steadily on a chosen vision, even when the outer environment has not yet rearranged itself to match that vision. When faith becomes active within you, the future begins to feel real long before it becomes visible. Imagine for a moment the life of any builder, inventor, or pioneer. Before their work became recognized by the world, they carried an inner conviction that others could not yet see. Friends may have doubted them. Circumstances may have looked discouraging, yet something inside them refused to release the vision they held. That quiet refusal is not stubbornness alone. It is the presence of faith guiding attention toward a reality that has not yet fully formed. Faith rarely operates alone. It is strengthened and directed by purpose. Purpose answers a question that every human being eventually faces. Why does this vision matter enough to pursue it? Without purpose, even the most exciting ambitions lose their energy when obstacles appear. But when a person understands the deeper reason behind their work, something changes in the way they approach difficulty. Challenges stop looking like barriers. They begin to look like part of the journey itself. Purpose organizes effort in the same way a riverbank directs the flow of water. When the direction of your life becomes clear, energy stops scattering in dozens of unrelated directions. Actions begin aligning naturally with the meaning you have chosen. You may still encounter uncertainty, but your movement no longer feels random. Every step participates in a larger pattern. This alignment between faith and purpose produces a third force that quietly determines outcomes over time. Steady focus. Focus may sound simple, yet it is one of the rarest disciplines in modern life. The world continuously offers distractions, competing priorities, and endless streams of information. Attention is pulled in different directions every hour. Under these conditions, many people struggle not because they lack ability, but because their attention rarely remains long enough in one direction for meaningful results to appear. Think about how growth occurs in nature. A seed does not grow by changing its direction every few days. It grows because its energy remains concentrated in one place long enough to form roots, stems, and eventually a full structure. Human achievement follows a similar rhythm. When your attention remains steady, ideas deepen, skills improve, relationships strengthen. Progress that once seemed distant begins appearing gradually. Steady focus also protects the mind from a common psychological trap: emotional fluctuation. When attention constantly shifts between excitement and doubt, action becomes inconsistent. A person may work intensely for a short period, then abandon the effort when results appear slower than expected. Over time, this pattern prevents progress from compounding. Faith and purpose stabilize attention so that focus can remain steady even during uncertainty. Instead of reacting emotionally to every small change in circumstance, you return repeatedly to the direction you have chosen. Your actions become less dependent on temporary moods and more connected to the larger vision guiding your life. You may notice that individuals who possess these inner forces often appear unusually calm. Their calmness does not come from having fewer problems. It comes from understanding that temporary conditions do not define the final outcome. When faith, purpose, and focus operate together, the mind learns to treat setbacks as adjustments rather than conclusions. This inner stability produces an interesting effect on the external world. People tend to trust individuals whose direction remains consistent. When your actions demonstrate steady commitment over time, others begin recognizing that you are not merely reacting to circumstances. You are building something intentionally. This recognition attracts collaboration, support, and opportunities that rarely appear for those whose direction constantly changes. In this way, inner forces gradually influence outer events. Faith keeps the vision alive when results have not yet appeared. Purpose reminds you why the vision matters. Focus translates that vision into consistent action over time. Together, these three elements create a powerful internal engine capable of moving life forward, even through periods of uncertainty. You might notice that none of these forces depend on external permission. No institution can grant them to you, and no circumstance can permanently remove them once they become part of your thinking. They belong entirely to the inner life of the individual. When a person begins cultivating them deliberately, the trajectory of their life often shifts in ways that appear surprising from the outside, but the transformation rarely feels sudden to the person experiencing it. Instead, it unfolds gradually. Thoughts become clearer, decisions become more deliberate, effort becomes more consistent. Small results appear first, then larger ones as persistence compounds. Observers may eventually call the outcome success. Yet the true turning point occurred much earlier, when faith replaced doubt, when purpose replaced confusion, and when attention learned to remain steady. Once these inner forces begin working together, a life starts moving with a quiet sense of direction that does not require constant validation from the outside world. Let me tell you something that most people completely overlook when they begin thinking about wealth, success, or transformation. They focus almost entirely on what they do not yet have. Their attention is constantly pulled toward absence, toward goals that remain distant, toward circumstances they wish were different. Day after day, the mind rehearses the same quiet message: something is missing. And when a mind repeats that message long enough, It begins to behave as if lack were the natural condition of life. Now I want you to pause for a moment and notice how powerful attention really is. Whatever you repeatedly focus on begins shaping the atmosphere of your thinking. If attention remains fixed on problems, the mind becomes skilled at detecting obstacles. If attention remains fixed on scarcity, the mind becomes sensitive to every form of limitation. Gradually, a person begins experiencing the world through a filter that constantly confirms the absence they are already expecting. But there is another way the mind can relate to life, and this way carries an extraordinary influence over the direction of events. It begins with something simple, yet rarely practiced with intention: gratitude. Gratitude is often treated as a polite gesture or a moral recommendation, something people are told to practice in order to appear humble or appreciative. But the deeper truth is far more significant. Gratitude is not merely an emotion. It is a form of alignment with the expanding nature of life itself. When gratitude becomes active in your thinking, attention shifts away from absence and toward recognition of what already exists. And this shift quietly changes everything. You see, the mind does not operate effectively in two opposite directions at the same time. It cannot fully experience appreciation while simultaneously dwelling on resentment or lack. When gratitude becomes genuine, attention reorganizes itself. You begin noticing opportunities that previously passed unnoticed. Resources that once seemed ordinary reveal their potential usefulness. Relationships gain new depth because appreciation strengthens the connection between people. In this way, gratitude becomes an expanding force. I want you to imagine the mind as a field receiving signals from the environment. Every day, countless possibilities pass through your awareness. Ideas, conversation, invitations, information. But what you notice depends largely on what your mind has been trained to detect. A person who expects scarcity filters experience differently from someone who expects growth. When gratitude becomes part of your thinking, you begin noticing abundance in places where others see only routine events. You recognize the value of knowledge, the power of cooperation, the presence of opportunity hidden within ordinary circumstances. Your perception expands because appreciation opens the mind rather than narrowing it. Now think about the emotional energy that accompanies gratitude. Instead of tension or dissatisfaction, gratitude produces a quiet sense of participation in life. You feel connected to what already exists, rather than separated from it. This emotional state influences behavior in ways that may not be obvious at first. A grateful person tends to approach work with greater enthusiasm because they value the opportunity to contribute. They treat relationships with greater care because they recognize their importance. They pursue improvement not from desperation, but from a desire to build upon what already exists. Over time, these behaviors produce tangible results. People naturally prefer working with individuals who appreciate collaboration rather than complain about circumstances. Opportunities often appear where appreciation has created strong relationships. Even creativity becomes easier because the mind operating in gratitude remains open and curious instead of defensive. You may begin to see that gratitude does something subtle yet powerful. It changes your relationship with the present moment. Many individuals postpone their sense of satisfaction until some future condition appears. They believe they will finally feel grateful when success arrives, when wealth grows, when recognition appears. But the principle works in the opposite direction. Gratitude must come first. When appreciation becomes active now before the visible results arrive, it prepares the mind to recognize and multiply opportunity. The emotional state of gratitude signals to your mind that growth is already underway. That signal influences your behavior, your attention, and your persistence. Let me explain this in a way that relates directly to your own experience. Suppose two people begin pursuing similar goals. One constantly complains about the distance between their present condition and the future they desire. Their attention remains fixed on what is missing, even when small progress appears. It rarely satisfies them because they immediately compare it with what has not yet happened. The second person approaches the same journey differently. They recognize each step forward, each lesson learned, each opportunity discovered along the way. Instead of focusing on the distance remaining, they appreciate the movement that has already begun. Over time, the difference becomes remarkable. The first individual often experiences frustration because progress never feels sufficient. The second individual experiences increasing motivation because every step becomes part of a growing story of improvement. Their gratitude strengthens persistence, which in turn produces more results worth appreciating. In this way, gratitude quietly accelerates growth. There is also a deeper dimension to this principle that many spiritual teachers throughout history have recognized. When you feel genuine gratitude, you enter a state of harmony with the creative movement of life itself. Instead of resisting circumstances or complaining about limitations, you participate in the ongoing expansion that characterizes existence. Life naturally grows, ideas evolve, systems improve, opportunities multiply when individuals cooperate creatively. Gratitude places your attention in alignment with this expanding current rather than in opposition to it. Once that alignment becomes consistent, the experience of life begins changing in subtle ways. You notice more possibilities. You approach challenges with curiosity rather than resentment. Even difficulties become opportunities for growth because appreciation allows you to extract meaning from every experience. Observers may look at such a person and say that fortune seems to follow them, but what they are really witnessing is the long-term effect of a mind that has learned to recognize abundance rather than overlook it. And the moment you begin practicing gratitude deliberately, you start participating in that same expanding movement. Let me ask you something that most people never stop to consider. Why do two individuals often live in the same world, face similar circumstances, and yet experience completely different outcomes? One moves forward steadily. Opportunities seem to open around them, and their work gradually gains momentum. The other works just as hard, sometimes even harder, yet progress feels inconsistent, almost unpredictable. The difference rarely lies in the visible actions alone. Long before results appear in the outer world, something subtle has already separated their paths. The difference is the way they think. You may have heard people say that success requires positive thinking, but that phrase often remains vague and misunderstood. Positive thinking, in the superficial sense, simply tries to replace unpleasant thoughts with pleasant ones. It becomes a temporary emotional exercise rather than a disciplined way of directing the mind. Thinking in the certain way is something far more precise. It means organizing your thoughts so that they align with growth, possibility, and purposeful action rather than drifting toward doubt, comparison, or confusion. I want you to imagine the mind as a powerful instrument that constantly shapes your interaction with reality. Every moment you are interpreting the world, evaluating opportunities, judging risks, deciding what deserves your attention. These interpretations influence the choices you make, and those choices eventually form the circumstances of your life. When thinking becomes scattered or uncertain, actions become inconsistent. But when thinking gains clarity and direction, behavior begins moving with remarkable efficiency. Thinking in the certain way begins with a simple but profound decision. You choose to believe that growth is not accidental but natural. Life itself is an expanding process. New ideas appear. New technologies transform industries. New systems replace outdated ones. When you accept this expansion as the underlying movement of the world, your mind stops reacting to conditions as though they were permanent obstacles. Instead, you begin asking how you might participate in that expansion. This shift may appear small, yet it changes how the mind approaches every challenge. When difficulties arise, uncertainty often invites doubt. Doubt weakens action because it divides attention between movement and hesitation. The certain way of thinking removes this division. Instead of asking whether progress is possible, the mind asks how progress can occur. You might notice that certainty does not require perfect knowledge. No person ever possesses complete information about the future. Certainty simply means committing your attention fully to the direction you have chosen. Once the direction becomes clear, you move toward it with steady confidence, rather than constantly questioning your decision. Think of a traveler navigating toward a distant destination. If they repeatedly stop to question whether the journey should continue, progress becomes slow and exhausting. But when the traveler trusts the direction and continues adjusting their route when necessary, the distance gradually closes. Thinking in the certain way works exactly like that. The destination remains present in the mind, guiding action even when the path requires occasional correction. Another element of this mindset involves discipline over attention. Modern life continuously competes for your focus. News, opinion, comparison, and distractions appear every hour. If you allow these influences to dominate your thinking, Your mental direction becomes unstable. One moment, you feel confident. The next moment, doubt enters through comparison or criticism. Thinking in the certain way requires guarding the direction of your attention. You do not ignore information or refuse to learn from others. Instead, you filter what enters your thinking through the purpose you have chosen. Ideas that support growth receive attention. Thoughts that generate unnecessary fear or confusion are quietly dismissed. This discipline protects the clarity of your direction. I want you to understand something else that happens when your thinking becomes certain. Your behavior begins reflecting that certainty even before results appear. The way you speak about your work changes. Your posture changes. Your decisions become faster because they are guided by conviction rather than hesitation. People around you notice this shift even if they cannot fully explain it. Confidence attracts cooperation. Individuals feel more comfortable working with someone who demonstrates clarity of direction. Opportunities often emerge through relationships, and relationships naturally strengthen when others sense stability in your thinking. In this way, the internal certainty of your mind gradually influences the external structure of your environment. But perhaps the most important effect occurs inside your own psychology. When you think with certainty, emotional energy stops fluctuating wildly with every small change in circumstance. You may still experience disappointment, of course, because setbacks are part of any meaningful endeavor. Yet those moments do not redefine your direction. They become temporary adjustments rather than reasons to abandon the vision guiding your work. Consider how powerful this stability becomes over time. Many people begin ambitious pursuits with enthusiasm, yet they lose momentum when progress appears slower than expected. Their thinking shifts from confidence to doubt, and that shift weakens persistence. Thinking in the certain way protects you from this cycle because your commitment remains connected to purpose rather than to immediate results. Gradually, something interesting begins to happen. Actions performed with steady conviction accumulate results that scattered effort could never produce. Skills deepen because attention remains focused long enough for mastery to develop. Relationships strengthen because others trust the reliability of your direction. Opportunities multiply because your thinking consistently recognizes them. From the outside, observers may say that such a person simply believes strongly in themselves. But the deeper truth is that they have learned to direct their thinking deliberately rather than allowing circumstances to control it. Once this discipline becomes part of your daily life, the mind begins operating like a compass that never loses its orientation. No matter what conditions appear temporarily around you, your thinking continues pointing toward growth. And when the direction of thought becomes stable, the direction of life gradually follows. At some point, every powerful idea must cross a quiet threshold. It must leave the invisible world of thought and enter the visible world of action. Many people become deeply interested in the principles of growth, abundance, and transformation. Yet their lives remain largely unchanged because the bridge between thinking and doing is never fully crossed. They may understand the philosophy, admire the vision, even feel inspired for a time, but inspiration alone does not move the machinery of reality. The world responds to movement, and movement begins with action. You might remember that earlier we spoke about thinking in the certain way, the discipline of directing your mind toward growth, clarity, and possibility. But thinking, no matter how powerful, remains incomplete until it is translated into behavior. Acting in the certain way means allowing your external life to reflect the direction your mind has already chosen. It means that your daily actions begin to match the vision you hold internally. This sounds simple, yet it requires a shift that many people find surprisingly difficult. Most individuals act according to their present circumstances rather than according to the future they intend to create. If conditions appear uncertain, their actions become hesitant. If results have not yet appeared, motivation weakens. Behavior then becomes reactive, shaped by the environment rather than shaping it. Acting in the certain way reverses this relationship. You begin behaving according to the vision that lives in your mind, rather than waiting for circumstances to approve that behavior. Imagine a person who has decided to build something meaningful, a new enterprise, a creative project, a service that improves the lives of others. If that person waits for perfect conditions before acting, the idea often remains dormant. Doubts accumulate, distractions multiply, and the momentum of daily life pulls attention elsewhere. But when the same person begins acting immediately, even in small ways, the entire situation changes. Action generates energy. Once you move from thought into motion, the environment begins responding. Conversations become purposeful. Information that once seemed irrelevant suddenly becomes useful. New connections appear because your actions signal that you are participating actively in life rather than observing from a distance. Even small steps begin altering the direction of events because movement itself attracts opportunity. This is why acting in the certain way does not require dramatic gestures. It requires consistent participation. You do not need to complete the entire journey in a single moment. What matters is that each action moves in the direction of the vision you hold. Every task becomes part of the construction process. When you write a page, to learn a skill, make a phone call, refine an idea, or strengthen a partnership, you are laying another brick in the structure you are building. Over time, these small actions accumulate in ways that appear almost surprising from the outside. What once looked like an ambitious dream gradually becomes a visible reality. Yet the transformation did not occur suddenly. It emerged from many deliberate steps performed consistently in the same direction. Another aspect of acting in the certain way involves the quality of your actions. When people operate under fear or doubt, their work often carries tension. They rush decisions, overlook details, or approach tasks reluctantly because their attention remains divided between effort and anxiety. Acting in the certain way requires something different. Each action should be performed with care and purpose, as though the result truly matters. When you approach work in this spirit, the quality of your contribution changes. You become attentive to improvement. You notice ways to refine systems, enhance efficiency, and serve others more effectively. Your work gains depth because it is guided by intention rather than by obligation alone. You might begin to see that this approach also transforms ordinary tasks. Even simple responsibilities become meaningful when they are connected to a larger vision. Instead of viewing work as a series of disconnected chores, you begin seeing it as a continuous process of building something valuable. Every action becomes a step toward expansion rather than merely a way to pass time. There is another important reason why acting in the certain way matters so deeply. Confidence grows through experience. When you repeatedly act according to your vision, you begin collecting evidence that progress is possible. Each completed step strengthens belief because it demonstrates that movement is occurring. Gradually, doubt loses its authority because action has replaced speculation. In contrast, hesitation often feeds uncertainty. When a person delays action repeatedly, their mind begins interpreting the delay as proof that the goal may be unrealistic. This interpretation weakens motivation and creates a cycle in which inaction reinforces doubt. Acting in the certain way breaks this cycle by replacing hesitation with deliberate participation. You may also notice that action influences the people around you. Individuals are naturally drawn to those who demonstrate initiative and reliability. When others see that you consistently move toward your vision, they become more willing to collaborate, support, and contribute. Partnerships form not because you demanded them, but because your actions signaled commitment and direction. This is how momentum gradually builds within a life. Thought provides the blueprint, but action provides the structure. Without the blueprint, construction becomes chaotic. Without construction, the blueprint remains a drawing on paper. When both operate together, clear thinking and consistent action, the process of creation begins unfolding with remarkable power. It is important to remember that acting in the certain way does not eliminate all difficulty. Obstacles will still appear because every meaningful endeavor encounters resistance at some stage. The difference lies in how you respond to those moments. Instead of interpreting them as signals to stop, you treat them as information guiding your next step. The mind remains focused on the vision, and the body continues moving toward it. Over time, this steady movement produces a remarkable effect. The environment gradually rearranges itself around the direction established by your actions. What once seemed distant becomes familiar. Opportunities that once looked unlikely begin appearing naturally because you have already been moving toward them. And long before the final results become visible, the structure of change has already been quietly rising through the actions you chose to take each day. You might believe that progress in life depends mainly on how hard a person works. That idea has been repeated so often that many people accept it without questioning it. They assume that effort alone guarantees advancement. And if results fail to appear, the solution must be to work even harder. Yet if you observe the world carefully, you will notice something interesting. Some individuals work constantly and still struggle to move forward, while others seem to accomplish remarkable things without appearing exhausted. The difference does not lie in the amount of effort alone. It lies in the efficiency with which that effort is directed. Let me explain what this means in a way that directly concerns you. Every human being possesses a limited amount of time and energy each day. Once a day has passed, those hours cannot be reclaimed. For this reason, progress does not depend simply on activity, but on the intelligent use of activity. Efficient action means directing your energy toward the tasks that actually move your life forward, instead of scattering that energy across countless distractions. This principle sounds obvious, yet it is rarely practiced with consistency. Many people begin their day reacting to whatever appears first: messages, obligations, small interruptions, minor requests from others. Hours pass quickly while attention shifts from one issue to another. At the end of the day, they feel exhausted, yet the work that truly matters remains unfinished. The day contained plenty of action, but very little progress. Efficient action requires a different orientation toward time. Instead of asking, "What must I respond to today?" you begin asking, "What action today will move my life meaningfully forward?" This question reorganizes your priorities immediately. Tasks that contribute to your larger vision receive attention first. Smaller obligations are handled later, delegated when possible, or sometimes removed entirely if they contribute nothing to progress. Once this habit develops, something remarkable happens. Even a single focused hour can produce more advancement than an entire day of scattered activity. When attention remains concentrated on one meaningful objective, your mind operates with greater clarity. Decisions become faster. Creativity increases because the mind is no longer dividing itself across multiple directions. You might compare this to sunlight passing through a magnifying glass. When light spreads across a wide surface, it produces warmth but little intensity. When the same light becomes concentrated through a single point, it gains the power to ignite fire. Human attention functions in exactly the same way. Concentrated effort generates progress. Scattered effort produces fatigue. Now I want you to notice another element that accompanies efficient action: discipline. Discipline is often misunderstood as rigid control or constant self-denial. In reality, discipline simply means protecting your direction. Once you have chosen a meaningful goal, discipline helps ensure that daily behavior aligns with that goal. It prevents your time from being consumed by activities that do not contribute to the life you are building. This protection becomes essential because the world continuously invites distraction. There are always new ideas, new conversations, new obligations competing for your attention. Without discipline, the mind easily drifts away from its intended direction. With discipline, attention returns repeatedly to the work that matters most. Progress, therefore, becomes less about bursts of motivation and more about steady structure. Many individuals rely on motivation alone to move forward. They wait for inspiration, for moments of excitement that make effort feel easy. But motivation fluctuates naturally. Some days energy feels high, while other days it fades. Discipline ensures that movement continues even when enthusiasm temporarily disappears. By honoring your commitments regardless of mood, you create continuity in your progress, and continuity produces extraordinary results over time. Consider how mastery develops in any field: music, science, engineering, business, art. No individual becomes skilled overnight. Improvement emerges through repeated practice, through small refinements performed consistently over months and years. Each session may appear modest on its own, yet the accumulation becomes powerful. Skills deepen, understanding expands, and the quality of work rises gradually until others begin noticing the difference. Efficient action accelerates this process because effort remains focused on meaningful growth rather than wasted on unnecessary movement. You may also discover that efficiency creates a sense of calm rather than pressure. When your actions align clearly with your priorities, the day gains structure. You know which tasks deserve attention and which can wait. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by endless obligations, you move steadily from one meaningful step to the next. This calmness becomes a quiet advantage. People who operate with efficient discipline often appear remarkably composed even in demanding environments. They do not rush impulsively from task to task because their direction is already clear. Their decisions become deliberate. Their work gains quality, and their time produces visible results. Another fascinating outcome emerges when efficient action becomes habitual. Momentum begins to build. Each completed task strengthens the next one because progress itself generates energy. When you see tangible movement toward your goals, motivation naturally returns. Confidence grows because you recognize the connection between focused effort and visible results. Gradually, the discipline that once required conscious effort becomes a natural rhythm in your life. Over time, observers may look at your progress and assume it happened quickly. Yet what they are really seeing is the long-term effect of efficiency and discipline working quietly day after day. You might begin to realize that extraordinary results rarely require extraordinary effort every single day. What they require is the consistent application of energy in the right direction. When effort becomes organized, purposeful, and disciplined, even ordinary days begin producing meaningful advancement. And once the discipline of efficient action becomes part of your life, progress stops feeling accidental. It becomes something you participate in deliberately, step by step, through the way you choose to use your time and attention. Have you ever met someone who seemed to carry a quiet sense of progress wherever they went? You may not have been able to explain it immediately, but something about their presence felt constructive. Conversations with them left people encouraged rather than discouraged. Their ideas seemed to move situations forward rather than circle endlessly around problems. Even in ordinary interactions, others felt a subtle lift, as though the atmosphere itself had gained a little more possibility. What you were witnessing in that moment was something deeper than charisma or charm. You were witnessing the impression of increase. Now listen carefully, because this principle has a profound effect on how opportunity flows through human relationships. Every interaction you have with another person leaves an impression. Sometimes that impression is neutral, sometimes negative, and sometimes it carries a sense of expansion that others can feel even if they cannot describe it. The individuals who consistently grow in influence tend to share one common habit whenever they engage with others. They leave behind a feeling that life has become slightly richer, slightly clearer, slightly more hopeful than before. This is what we mean by the impression of increase. Most people move through social life without realizing how strongly their internal state shapes the atmosphere around them. If a person constantly complains, focuses on scarcity, or speaks from frustration, those emotions subtly transfer into the conversation. Even when their words appear polite, the underlying tone communicates limitation. Others may respond with sympathy for a moment, but they rarely feel inspired or energized by the interaction. On the other hand, when a person genuinely believes in growth, their presence begins transmitting that belief. They talk about possibilities instead of only problems. They recognize potential where others might overlook it. Their attention naturally highlights improvement rather than decline. In doing so, they create an environment in which others begin seeing opportunities more clearly. You might think of this as emotional architecture. Just as physical spaces influence the way people feel and behave, the mental and emotional atmosphere created during conversation influences the direction of relationships. A person who leaves the impression of increase becomes someone others enjoy working with, learning from, and supporting. Their presence suggests movement towards something better rather than a return to familiar limitations. Now I want you to notice something important about this principle. The impression of increase does not require exaggeration or forced optimism. People quickly recognize artificial enthusiasm. True influence grows from authenticity. When your thinking genuinely aligns with expansion, when you truly believe that life contains room for improvement, your communication reflects that belief naturally. You begin listening more attentively because you are interested in understanding what others are building. You respond thoughtfully because you see conversations as opportunities for collaboration rather than competition. Even when discussing challenges, your tone suggests that solutions are possible. In this way, your presence becomes associated with constructive momentum. Over time, this habit changes how people perceive you. Human relationships are guided not only by logic but also by emotional memory. People remember how interactions make them feel. If a person repeatedly leaves others feeling discouraged or drained, invitations gradually decline. But if someone consistently leaves others feeling encouraged, respected, and capable of progress, the opposite effect occurs. That person becomes welcome in more conversations, more collaborations, more opportunities. This is one of the quiet ways influence expands. Notice that the process does not depend on status or authority. Influence grows because people choose to involve themselves with individuals who elevate their thinking. When someone consistently brings clarity, encouragement, and constructive ideas into conversations, others naturally want that presence nearby. You might begin to see that the impression of increase also strengthens your own thinking. When you make a habit of recognizing potential in others, your attention becomes trained to look for growth everywhere. Instead of dwelling on limitations, you begin observing possibilities in systems, projects, and relationships. This habit enriches your own imagination while simultaneously strengthening the people around you. In a sense, the process becomes reciprocal. As you contribute encouragement and insight to others, their energy and creativity return to you through collaboration. Ideas expand through dialogue. Projects evolve through shared effort. Opportunities multiply because the environment surrounding you becomes increasingly oriented toward progress. Consider how powerful this becomes in professional life. Many individuals possess technical skills, yet their influence remains limited because their interactions lack constructive energy. Others may possess similar skills but also carry the habit of increasing the people around them. They recognize effort, offer thoughtful ideas, and encourage growth in ways that strengthen entire teams. Organizations notice this difference quickly. The person who leaves the impression of increase becomes trusted. Their perspective gains weight because others associate their presence with improvement. They are invited into important discussions, consulted during difficult decisions, and given opportunities to guide projects forward. But the most important effect occurs at a deeper level than recognition. When you consistently approach people with respect for their potential, you participate in the expansion of human possibility itself. Every individual carries abilities that may remain dormant until someone believes in them strongly enough to call them forward. Your words, your attention, and your encouragement may become the moment that awakens that potential. Think about the influence hidden within that possibility. You may never fully know how many lives are strengthened by a single conversation that reminds someone of their own capability. You may not see every result that grows from the encouragement you offer. Yet those moments contribute quietly to the expanding network of human progress. This is why the impression of increase matters so deeply. It transforms ordinary interaction into an opportunity for growth. Each conversation becomes a chance to contribute clarity, encouragement, and constructive energy to another human being. And when that habit becomes part of your daily life, your influence begins spreading naturally, not through force or authority, but through the quiet power of increasing the people you meet. Sooner or later, every person who begins walking the path of creation encounters a moment that quietly tests the strength of their vision. At first, the journey feels full of energy. Ideas appear fresh, motivation runs high, and the future seems to move closer with every step. But then something unexpected happens. Progress slows. Results take longer than anticipated. Obstacles appear in places where you expected open roads. It is in these moments, not at the beginning, that the true power of your vision begins to reveal itself. You see, anyone can believe in possibility when conditions look favorable. Confidence comes easily when the path ahead appears smooth. But the real measure of conviction emerges when time stretches between effort and visible reward. When days pass without clear evidence that your work is moving the world in the direction you imagined, the mind begins asking difficult questions. Doubt whispers quietly. Perhaps the goal was unrealistic. Perhaps the timing was wrong. Perhaps the vision itself was nothing more than a hopeful illusion. This is the moment where many people turn back, not because they lack ability or intelligence, but because the delay between cause and effect unsettles their faith in the process. They expected the seeds they planted to grow quickly, and when the soil remains quiet for a while, they assume nothing is happening. Yet anyone who understands how growth truly works knows that the most important stages occur beneath the surface, long before visible signs appear. Think about how nature develops anything of lasting strength. A tree does not push its branches toward the sky the moment a seed touches the ground. First, it sends roots downward into darkness, searching for stability. These roots grow silently, unseen by anyone passing above the soil. Days, weeks, sometimes months pass without any sign that life is forming. But beneath that quiet surface, A structure is taking shape that will eventually support an entire living organism. Human creation follows the same rhythm. When you commit yourself to a meaningful vision, the early stages often unfold invisibly. Skills must be developed. Relationships must evolve. Ideas must mature. During this period, the external world may not yet reflect the changes happening within you. If you judge progress only by immediate results, you may conclude that nothing is happening. But if you understand the nature of growth, you recognize that preparation is part of creation. Holding the vision during this phase requires something deeper than enthusiasm. It requires trust in the direction you have chosen. Trust does not mean ignoring reality. Difficulties are real, and every meaningful pursuit includes moments of uncertainty. But trust allows you to interpret those moments differently. Instead of seeing delay as failure, you recognize it as part of the development process. The vision remains alive because you understand that timing often follows a rhythm larger than your personal expectations. Let me speak to you directly here, because this principle becomes personal when you apply it to your own life. When difficulties appear, the mind naturally wants reassurance. You want evidence that the effort is worth continuing. Yet many of the greatest transformations occur during periods when reassurance is scarce. In those moments, the vision must live primarily inside you. Your daily actions then become expressions of that inner vision, rather than reactions to external approval. You continue learning even when no one notices the progress. You refine your work even when recognition remains distant. You maintain discipline even when results appear slowly. This persistence may look ordinary from the outside, but internally it represents a powerful alignment between belief and action. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. The very difficulties that once seemed discouraging begin shaping your strength. Obstacles reveal weaknesses that must be corrected. Delays provide time to deepen understanding. Mistakes expose blind spots that would otherwise remain hidden. Each challenge contributes information that gradually refines the path forward. In this way, difficulty becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Many individuals who eventually accomplish remarkable things later look back and realize that the hardest moments were also the most formative. Without those experiences, they might have moved forward too quickly, building success on unstable foundations. The delays forced them to develop patience, clarity, and resilience, qualities that later allowed their achievements to endure. Another important transformation occurs during these periods of uncertainty. Your relationship with time begins to change. Instead of demanding immediate outcomes, you start respecting the natural pace of development. You understand that meaningful work requires seasons of quiet preparation before visible progress emerges. This patience does not weaken ambition, it strengthens it. When you accept the rhythm of growth, you stop measuring success only by immediate milestones. You begin measuring it by alignment, by how faithfully your actions reflect the vision guiding your life. Each day that you remain committed becomes a victory in itself because it keeps the creative process alive. Eventually, the external world begins reflecting what has been developing internally. Opportunities appear, relationships shift, and results emerge that once seemed distant. Observers may interpret these moments as sudden success, unaware of the long period of preparation that preceded them. But you know something different. You know that the visible breakthrough represents the continuation of a process that began much earlier. During the quiet days when the vision existed mainly inside your mind, those were the days when you chose to continue despite uncertainty, when you trusted growth even when it remained invisible. And once you experience how powerful that persistence can become, delay no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes part of the journey through which vision gradually transforms into reality. There is a quiet truth about wealth that many people discover only after experience teaches it to them. Creating wealth and sustaining wealth are not the same skill. A person may earn a great deal of money for a short time, may even experience moments of rapid success, yet find that prosperity slips through their hands almost as quickly as it arrived. History offers countless examples of individuals who reached financial heights only to fall again because the inner structure required to hold that success had not yet formed. This is why wealth, in its deepest sense, is not merely a possession. It is a capacity. You see, circumstances can change faster than character develops. Opportunity can appear suddenly through invention, luck, or favorable timing. But if the person receiving that opportunity has not grown into the responsibility that wealth requires, the result often becomes unstable. Without discipline, clarity, and wisdom. Prosperity can turn into pressure rather than freedom. This is why the journey toward wealth always contains another journey hidden within it, the transformation of the individual who receives it. Let me speak to you directly about what that transformation means. When people imagine wealth, they often picture the external results: financial freedom, comfort, influence, the ability to make choices without constant concern about survival. But behind these visible benefits lies a more important question. Who must you become in order to hold such freedom wisely? The answer begins with responsibility. A person capable of sustaining wealth understands that resources carry influence. Money amplifies decisions. It allows actions to reach further into the world. When guided by clarity and integrity, that influence can create opportunities not only for oneself but also for others. Businesses expand, communities develop, innovation grows, and people find employment or inspiration through the initiatives that wealth makes possible. Without responsibility, however, the same resources can produce chaos. Impulsive decisions multiply quickly. Unwise investments drain stability. Relationships become strained when trust disappears. Wealth then becomes something fragile rather than enduring. Responsibility grows through awareness. You begin observing how your decisions affect the people and systems around you. You recognize that prosperity is not only about receiving but also about directing energy wisely. Instead of treating wealth as something to display, you begin seeing it as a tool for creation and improvement. This shift in perspective quietly transforms the way a person approaches life. Another essential quality emerges alongside responsibility: discipline. Sustaining wealth requires the ability to manage impulses and maintain long-term vision. The world constantly offers opportunities to spend, invest, or commit resources in ways that promise immediate satisfaction. Discipline helps you evaluate these choices carefully. Instead of reacting emotionally to every possibility, you consider how each decision aligns with your larger direction. You may notice that individuals who sustain prosperity often appear calm in situations where others become excited or anxious. This calmness comes from perspective. They understand that wealth grows through steady stewardship rather than through dramatic bursts of activity. Stewardship is a powerful word. It implies caring for something that carries value beyond the present moment. When you view wealth as something entrusted to your management, your relationship with it changes. You begin protecting it from unnecessary risk, while also guiding it toward productive use. Investments become thoughtful rather than impulsive. Generosity becomes meaningful rather than careless. But there is another transformation that occurs when a person grows into the ability to sustain wealth. Their identity expands. Earlier in life, many people see themselves primarily as workers or earners. Their attention focuses on effort, how many hours they work, how much income arrives in return. As prosperity grows, the role gradually shifts. You begin thinking less like someone chasing opportunity and more like someone shaping environments. This means asking new kinds of questions. How can resources be organized to create lasting value? How can systems be improved so that success continues beyond individual effort? How can knowledge, capital, and relationships combine to build something that benefits others while remaining stable over time? These questions signal the evolution from accumulation to leadership. And leadership is essential for sustaining wealth, because prosperity often affects many lives simultaneously. Employees depend on the stability of an enterprise. Partners trust your judgment in shared ventures. Communities benefit from the businesses and services that prosperity helps maintain. The person capable of sustaining wealth understands that influence grows naturally from these relationships. They treat success not as a private possession but as a position from which constructive impact can expand. Another important quality begins developing during this transformation: humility. Humility does not mean underestimating your ability. It means recognizing that growth remains an ongoing process. Markets change. Technologies evolve. New challenges appear unexpectedly. A humble mind stays curious and adaptable, continuing to learn even after success arrives. This openness protects prosperity because it prevents stagnation. Instead of assuming that past success guarantees future results, you remain attentive to the changing landscape of opportunity. You refine your thinking, expand your knowledge, and adjust strategies when necessary. In this way, wealth becomes part of a larger journey of personal development. You are no longer simply pursuing financial results. You are shaping a character capable of guiding those results wisely. Your thinking grows more strategic. Your relationships become more intentional. Your sense of purpose expands beyond personal gain into contribution and creation. When this transformation takes place, wealth begins behaving differently in your life. It stops feeling fragile because your identity no longer depends on it. You understand that the same clarity, discipline, and creativity that helped create prosperity can continue producing value in the future. The source of wealth becomes internal rather than external. And once you become the kind of person who can sustain prosperity, the presence of wealth no longer appears accidental. It becomes a natural extension of who you have chosen to become. Many people live in a strange tension between two different moments in time. Their minds are constantly pulled toward the future they hope to reach. Yet their attention rarely settles fully into the present moment where their life is actually unfolding. They imagine a day when circumstances will finally improve, when success will arrive, when they will finally feel satisfied with what they have built. Until that moment appears, they treat the present as something temporary, almost like a waiting room where life is paused until the real story begins. But let me tell you something important, something that changes the way you understand progress entirely. The future is not built in some distant moment that will arrive one day without warning. It is constructed quietly within the present, through the quality of the thoughts you hold and the actions you choose right now. If the present moment is neglected, the future loses the only place where it can actually be created. You see, creative living does not mean constantly imagining tomorrow while ignoring today. That means participating fully in the present while carrying a clear direction for where you are going. The mind holds the vision of the future, but the hands work with the materials available now. In this balance, something powerful begins to happen. Each ordinary moment becomes part of the construction of a larger life. I want you to notice how many people approach their daily work. They complete tasks mechanically, counting the hours until the day ends. Their attention drifts toward distant goals or past frustrations. Because of this divided focus, the present moment feels heavy and slow. Life becomes something to endure rather than something to shape. Creative living reverses this pattern. Instead of treating the present as an obstacle between you and your dreams, you begin treating it as the workshop where those dreams take form. Every conversation, every decision, every small act of improvement becomes part of the process of building the future you have imagined. When this perspective becomes natural, work no longer feels like something separate from purpose. It becomes the expression of that purpose. You may notice something subtle about individuals who live creatively. They appear deeply engaged with whatever they are doing, whether they are solving a problem, learning a new skill, or collaborating with others. Their attention is fully present. This presence gives their actions quality. They notice details others overlook. They discover improvements others miss. Over time, this habit of attention compounds into remarkable results. Living creatively also changes the way you experience time. When people feel disconnected from their work, time often feels slow and exhausting. But when you participate fully in what you are creating, time begins to move differently. Hours pass quickly because attention is absorbed in meaningful activity. Instead of waiting for the future, you feel the satisfaction of contributing to it directly through the present moment. This is why creative living generates energy rather than draining it. You might wonder how it is possible to remain present while still thinking about long-term goals. The answer lies in the relationship between vision and action. The vision provides direction, but the present moment provides the opportunity for expression. When both operate together, life gains balance. You know where you are going, yet you remain fully engaged in the step that lies immediately before you. Think of a traveler crossing a vast landscape. They may know the destination they are moving toward, but each step still requires attention. The traveler watches the terrain, adjusts direction when necessary, and appreciates the journey as it unfolds. If they spent every moment staring only at the horizon, they would stumble over the ground beneath their feet. Progress happens through the steps themselves. Life works the same way. Your future grows out of the habits you practice today. The quality of your thinking today shapes the decisions you make tomorrow. The relationships you nurture today become the collaborations that expand your opportunities later. Nothing meaningful arrives suddenly from outside this process. Creative living also protects the mind from a common form of discouragement. When people focus exclusively on distant goals, progress can appear painfully slow. They measure the distance remaining rather than the movement already occurring. But when you live creatively in the present, each day contains its own sense of accomplishment. You recognize the growth that happens through learning, improvement, and contribution. This recognition strengthens persistence. Instead of feeling as though success is always far away, you begin experiencing the satisfaction of progress along the way. The journey itself becomes meaningful because every moment contains an opportunity to create something better than what existed before. Another interesting transformation occurs in your relationships when you live creatively. People respond to those who are genuinely engaged with life. Your enthusiasm becomes visible in your attention, your curiosity, and your willingness to explore new ideas. Conversations become richer because you are present rather than distracted by distant worries. These connections often become unexpected sources of opportunity. Many of the most important moments in life arise from simple interactions, a conversation that introduces a new idea, a collaboration that leads to a breakthrough, a chance meeting that changes direction entirely. When you remain present and open, you become available for these possibilities. Gradually, you begin to realize that the future is not something waiting somewhere ahead of you. It is forming continuously through the way you think, speak, and act today. Every moment offers the chance to shape it. Living creatively means accepting this responsibility with curiosity rather than pressure. You understand that progress does not require perfection. It requires participation. And when you participate fully in the present while carrying a clear vision for tomorrow, the boundary between the two begins to disappear. The future no longer feels distant. It begins taking shape quietly in the life you are already living. If you look back across everything we have explored together, a pattern begins to emerge that is far more powerful than any single technique or strategy. Wealth, in its deepest sense, is not something chased desperately through random effort. It is something approached deliberately through clarity of thought, disciplined action, creative contribution, and a spirit that remains aligned with growth. When these elements come together, prosperity stops appearing mysterious. It begins to look like the natural result of a life that has learned to move in harmony with expansion. Yet there are two forces that quietly hold all of these principles together. Without them, progress easily becomes unstable. With them, movement toward prosperity gains a remarkable steadiness. Those two forces are certainty and gratitude. Certainty is the inner condition that allows you to move forward even when the outer world has not yet fully revealed the results of your work. It is the quiet understanding that growth follows principles rather than accidents. When certainty becomes part of your thinking, hesitation begins losing its authority. You stop asking whether your efforts will eventually produce value and instead focus on how faithfully you are applying the principles that lead toward expansion. You may notice that certainty does not require arrogance. It does not claim that every step will be perfect or that every decision will succeed immediately. Instead, it provides a deeper form of confidence. You trust the direction you have chosen because you understand the laws behind it. Just as a farmer trusts that seeds will grow when planted and cared for properly, you trust that disciplined thought and creative action will gradually produce results. This trust changes the way you experience difficulty. Instead of interpreting obstacles as signs of failure, you begin seeing them as temporary adjustments within a much larger process. The path toward any meaningful achievement contains moments of uncertainty. Markets shift, ideas evolve, and unexpected challenges appear. Certainty does not eliminate these experiences, but it prevents them from weakening your commitment. Your attention remains fixed on the direction of growth rather than on the temporary shape of circumstances. But certainty alone is not enough to sustain the full richness of a prosperous life. Without balance, it can quietly harden into ambition without appreciation. This is where gratitude becomes essential. Gratitude reminds you that prosperity is not merely a future destination. It is also a present experience. When gratitude becomes part of your thinking, you begin noticing the abundance already surrounding you, the knowledge you have gained, the relationships that support your journey, the opportunities that have appeared through your efforts. Instead of treating the present moment as something incomplete or lacking, you recognize it as part of an expanding story. This recognition protects the mind from a common trap. Many individuals postpone satisfaction until their goals are fully achieved. They believe that happiness and appreciation must wait until success arrives in its final form. But life rarely unfolds in such clear boundaries. Progress occurs gradually, through countless small improvements that build upon each other over time. Gratitude allows you to recognize those improvements as they happen. When you practice gratitude, your attention naturally expands toward possibility rather than limitation. You notice resources that might otherwise be overlooked. You recognize the value in people and ideas that appear along your path. This openness invites collaboration and discovery because your mind is not closed by dissatisfaction. Now imagine what happens when certainty and gratitude operate together. Certainty keeps your vision strong even when results develop slowly. Gratitude keeps your spirit balanced so that progress remains meaningful rather than exhausting. One directs you forward, while the other allows you to appreciate the journey already unfolding. Together they create a powerful rhythm in your life. You work with discipline because you trust the direction of your efforts. At the same time, you remain thankful for each step that carries you forward. Success stops feeling like something distant that must be seized quickly before it disappears. Instead, it becomes a continuous process of growth that unfolds through your daily actions. You might notice that individuals who live in this rhythm often appear calm, even while building ambitious projects. Their calmness does not come from lack of effort. It comes from alignment. They understand that prosperity grows from steady participation in the creative movement of life. As long as their thinking and actions remain aligned with that movement, progress will continue. This perspective also transforms the way you influence others. When people see someone advancing with quiet certainty and genuine gratitude, they feel encouraged rather than intimidated. Your presence communicates stability. Your confidence invites collaboration instead of competition. Opportunities multiply because others recognize that working with you strengthens their own growth. In this way, prosperity expands beyond individual success. Your ideas inspire others to explore new possibilities. Your discipline demonstrates that meaningful progress is achievable. Your gratitude reminds people that abundance can be experienced even while building toward greater goals. Through these influences, the impact of your journey extends far beyond the financial results themselves. Eventually, you realize that wealth is not merely an accumulation of resources. It is the outward reflection of an inner alignment that has matured over time. Your thinking has become clear. Your actions have become purposeful. Your relationships have become constructive. And your spirit remains open to both growth and appreciation. When these qualities come together, life begins moving forward with a quiet sense of inevitability. You continue learning, creating, and contributing because expansion has become part of who you are. The future no longer feels uncertain in the way it once did. It feels like a natural continuation of the direction you have chosen to walk. And as you move forward with certainty in your vision and gratitude in your heart, prosperity becomes less something you chase and more something that gradually meets you along the path you are already walking.